The night Cord Halsey pulled over on Route 9 outside Ashford, Connecticut, he had exactly $38 in his wallet, a dying phone, and a blind date he was already praying would cancel. He hadn't wanted any of this. His younger brother, Mitch, had spent 3 weeks wearing him down. "She's not like that, Cord. She's normal. She just works a lot." Cord had heard that before. Normal women didn't get set up through their company's PR director. Normal women drove sensible cars and answered texts before midnight. The woman Mitch described, Catherine something, worked in finance, kept to herself, sounded like every nightmare date Cord had survived since his divorce. Polished, impatient, and fundamentally confused about why she was sitting across from a man who fixed boats for a living. He was 37, a single father to a 6-year-old named Willa, and the owner of Halsey Marine Repair, a small boatyard on the Housatonic River that had belonged to his grandfather before it belonged to his father before it belonged to him. The business was bleeding. March had brought 3 back-to-back nor'easters that gutted his walk-in schedule, and the bank wasn't the kind of institution that cared about weather patterns. He had a final payment due in 18 days on a loan his father had taken out before he died. $45,000. Cord had 11. Tonight he had traded his stained Carhartt jacket for the navy blazer he kept in a garment bag on the back of his office door, told Willa that Grammy was coming to watch her because Daddy had a dinner thing, and driven 40 minutes toward Hartford in the rain. He was already rehearsing the polite exit. 1 drink. An hour, max. Then home to his daughter, who smelled like lavender shampoo and was probably already asleep with her book open on her chest. He almost missed her. The car was pulled half onto the grass shoulder of the 2-lane road, hazards blinking weakly in the downpour. A dark-colored coupe, low and sleek. Cord's headlights swept across it as he rounded the bend, and his foot lifted off the gas before his brain had consciously made the decision. He knew boats the way some men knew horses, by sound, by posture, by the particular kind of stillness that meant something was wrong. Cars weren't his specialty, but a vehicle sitting that way, at that angle, in this weather, on a stretch of road with no shoulder lighting and no cell signal for another 2 miles. That was a person in trouble. He pulled over. The rain was serious. He turned his collar up and jogged toward the car. A woman was behind the wheel, both hands in her lap, staring at her phone screen the way people do when they're trying to will it into working. He knocked twice on the glass. Light taps, not aggressive. She lowered the window an inch. He understood why. She was alone, it was dark, and he was a stranger. He kept his hands visible. "You all right?" he called over the rain. "Engine cut out?" It overheated. Her voice was controlled, clipped, the kind of voice that was used to giving information without asking for anything back. "I've been waiting for it to cool down. I'm fine." "How long ago?" A pause. 20 minutes. Cord glanced at the steam still wisping from the hood seam. "It's not cool yet. You've got a hose or a gasket issue. The temperature probably spiked fast, which means the coolant isn't circulating the way it should. If you try to start it now, you'll crack the block." He said it matter-of-factly, not to impress her, just because it was true and she needed to know. "Can I take a look?" Another pause, longer this time. Then the door opened. She was dressed for somewhere important. Dark wool coat over what looked like a tailored dress, low heels that were absolutely not suited for wet grass. She was striking in a way that had nothing to do with the clothes. Sharp cheekbones, dark eyes that assessed him in about 2 seconds flat, the kind of posture that came from years of being the most prepared person in any given room. She looked at him the way she'd probably look at a quarterly report she hadn't expected to read tonight. Not dismissive, just rapid. "Pop the hood for me," he said. She did. He pulled his keychain flashlight. He carried it out of habit, the way she probably carried a pen, and leaned over the engine. The upper radiator hose had a split about 3 inches from the clamp. Clean break. It had been softening for a while, and finally gave in the heat. The reservoir was dry. "Hose blew," he said. "You've got no coolant left. That's why she overheated. Can you fix it here?" "Not permanently. But I've got tape and a gallon of water in the truck. I can seal it enough to get you to civilization." He was already walking back to his pickup. "It'll hold maybe 15 miles if you don't push it." She followed him, which surprised him. not hovering, just standing nearby with her arms crossed against the cold. When he came back with the duct tape and the water jug, she held the flashlight without being asked, angling it precisely where he needed it without him having to say a word. He noticed that. Some people handed over a flashlight and then lit up the wrong thing for 5 minutes straight. She put it exactly where it needed to go. "You're good at that," he said. "I pay attention," she said it simply. They worked in near silence for a few minutes. The rain softened slightly, dropping from a roar to a steady hiss. He wrapped the split section carefully. 2 layers kept the tension even. Then he poured water slowly into the reservoir until it reached the minimum line. "That'll get you there," he said, straightening up. "Drive slow, no highway. And if the temperature gauge starts climbing past the halfway mark, pull over immediately and call a tow. Thank you." She said it like she meant it, which was different from how most people said it. He was about to walk back to his truck when she spoke again. "You're going somewhere." It wasn't a question. She'd looked at the blazer. "Was," he said. "Blind date. Downtown Hartford." He shrugged. "Figure I'll be late enough that she'll either leave or be annoyed enough that it saves both the trouble." Something shifted in her expression, quick, almost imperceptible. "What restaurant?" "Aldwyn House." He said it like a man pronouncing a medical diagnosis. "Not exactly my kind of place." She was quiet for a moment, then, almost despite herself, "Maybe she doesn't like it either." He looked at her. "You sound like you know something about expensive restaurants you don't want to be at." "I know something about being expected to perform in rooms that aren't built for honest conversation." She said it evenly, looking past him at the dark road. He didn't know what to do with that sentence, so he just said, "Well, hope your night gets easier. Yours too." She held out her hand. "Catherine." He shook it. Her grip was firm and quick, the handshake of someone who'd done it 10,000 times in conference rooms. "Cord." He watched her pull away, headlights cutting into the rain, moving carefully, slowly. Good. She'd listened. He didn't think about her again until he walked into Aldwyn House 22 minutes later, still damp at the collar, and the hostess led him to a corner table where a woman in a dark wool coat was already seated, her hands folded around a glass of water, and he stopped walking. She looked up. The silence lasted about 3 seconds, which felt like considerably longer. "You're kidding me," Cord said. Catherine Aldridge, CFO and acting CEO of Aldridge Capital Partners, stared at the man who had just fixed her car on the side of Route 9 in the rain and said nothing for a moment. Then, "You're the mechanic my brother set me up with. I fix boats." He sat down. He didn't know why that felt important to say, but it did. "He said you worked on the water." Her composure had returned, though it was slightly different now. Less armor, more effort. "I thought he meant shipping logistics." He knew exactly what he meant. Cord picked up the menu, looked at it for 3 seconds, and set it back down. The cheapest entree was $110. He had $38 in his wallet and a credit card that was $500 away from its limit. "Your brother set this up?" "My brother and my chief of staff, apparently working in concert." She looked at him with that same rapid assessment from the highway. "You didn't know either." "My brother Mitch said she works in finance." Kept it vague on purpose. Smart brothers. She said it without warmth, but there was something underneath it. Cord leaned back. The room was exactly what he'd expected. Hushed and expensive, the kind of place where the lighting was designed to make everyone look significant. He felt the weight of it the same way he always felt it in rooms like this, the specific discomfort of knowing he was underdressed in a way that money would have cured, and that he didn't have. He'd felt it at every bank meeting for the past year. A sommelier appeared at the table's edge, lifting a leather-bound wine list in both hands like an offering. Cord looked at Catherine. Catherine looked at the sommelier. "We'll take a moment," she said. The man retreated. "You were already planning your exit," Cord said. He'd watched enough people across enough negotiating tables, boat owners haggling on hull jobs, insurance adjusters, the bank officers who wore their skepticism like a badge to read the room. "Before I walked in, you had a plan." She studied him. 1 drink, hour maximum. Early meeting, same. He almost smiled. "Down to the fake early meeting. Mine isn't fake." For the first time, something in her voice shifted toward real. I genuinely have a 7 a.m. board call. We're in the middle of a hostile restructuring, and two of my senior partners are the reason I'm staring down a lawsuit from a pension fund in 3 states. She said it the way a person says something they've been carrying all day, and finally just sat on a table because their arms were tired. Not complaining. Just accurate. Cord was quiet. Then, that sounds exhausting. It is. She looked at him like she hadn't expected that response. It really is. The sommelier reappeared. Catherine closed the wine menu. Just water for the table, please. And could you give us 15 minutes before we order? When he left, she looked at Cord. The prices here are unreasonable. I wasn't going to say that, I know. That's why I said it. She set the menu aside. I've been coming here for 4 years for client dinners. I've never ordered something I actually wanted. Everything's designed to signal status. The portions are the size of a business card. Cord laughed. It came out before he could decide whether to let it. I had mac and cheese ready to go at home. How old is your daughter? He paused. Mitch told you. He led with it. Thought it would help. She tilted her head slightly. Does it bother you that he did? No. He said it honestly. Will is the best thing in my life. I'm not going to pretend that's not true to seem more dateable. He looked at her. How'd you know it was a daughter? He said her name. Willa. A ghost of something crossed her face. Not quite a smile, but in the same neighborhood. That's a good name. The tension in the room shifted. Not gone, but different. Okay, Cord said. I'm going to be straight with you. This place is not for me. I don't mean that as a complaint. You clearly have a life that fits here, and that's fine. But I drove 40 minutes and fixed your car in the rain, and now I'm sitting in a room where a side salad costs $35, and I think we both know this isn't the natural habitat for either of us to have an honest conversation. Catherine was quiet for a moment. She looked at the table, then at him. There's a diner on Wethersfield Avenue. It's open until 2. The coffee is terrible, the pie is exceptional, and exactly 0 of my board members will be there. I know it, Cord said. My dad used to take me there after Little League. She stood up and picked up her coat. Then let's go. They left the wine on the table, the bread untouched, the menus perfectly aligned. The hostess watched them walk out with the mild bewilderment of someone who had seen many things, but not quite this. Dunning's Diner on Wethersfield had red vinyl booths and a wall of windows that looked out onto a wet, empty street. The overhead lights were the kind that showed every line on every face, which Cord had always thought was actually a more honest way to look at someone. No flattering shadows, just people. The waitress, a woman named Pat who had worked there since before Catherine was born, brought 2 coffees without being asked and said, "Pie's apple ginger tonight. You want?" They both said yes without conferring. Cord wrapped his hands around the mug. What happened tonight? With the car, I dismissed my driver. She said it like she was slightly embarrassed by the fact that she had a driver. I do it sometimes, when I need to feel like a normal person for 20 minutes. Tonight, I needed that more than usual. She paused. The lawsuit news broke internally this afternoon. I spent 4 hours managing damage control while also pretending to 3 separate partners that I wasn't managing damage control. By the time I left the office, I just needed to drive, and instead you ended up on the side of Route 9 with a blown radiator hose and a boat mechanic in a navy blazer. The corner of her mouth moved, which was not in the plans. He shook his head slowly. My dad had a plan for the boatyard. 3-phase expansion. New dry dock facility, partner with the Maritime School over in Middletown, build a restoration side for classic wooden boats. The kind of work that actually pays. He turned the coffee mug a quarter turn. He died before phase 1 was finished. Left me the loan and the blueprint, and about 4.5 years of work he hadn't gotten to yet. Catherine was listening with her full attention, not the professional half-listening of someone waiting to respond, but the actual kind, where your eyes don't move. I've been fighting the bank for 18 months, he said. I've got 1 payment left that I can't make. He hadn't meant to say that last part. It came out anyway. 18 days, 45,000. She didn't react with pity. She didn't offer advice. She said, what does the business actually look like? Not the debt. The work. He looked at her. I want to understand what you're protecting, she said. So he told her about the 32 active clients, half of them multi-generational boating families who'd been bringing their vessels to Halsey's since his grandfather's time. About the three-man crew he'd kept employed through 4 bad winters because they had families and because good marine technicians didn't grow on trees. About the restoration he'd just finished on a 1962 Chris craft that had taken 11 months and every bit of craft he had in him, and how the owner had wept when he saw it come off the trailer. You documented that restoration? Catherine asked. Every stage. Photographed it for the insurance file. That's your portfolio. That's not a struggling small business. That's a specialty operation with a legacy client base and documented craftsmanship. She said it the way she probably said things in boardrooms, not to be herself, but because she'd processed the information and reached a conclusion. You're not pitching this right to the bank. You're going in as a distressed borrower. You should be going in as a niche acquisition target. Cord stared at her. Sorry. She pulled back slightly. I do that. Occupational habit. No, he said slowly. Keep going. She talked. He listened. Pat brought the pie and refilled the coffee, and they barely noticed. She explained the difference between how a bank saw a defaulting small business and how a private maritime investment group or a conservation-minded foundation would see a 3-generation coastal restoration operation with proven craftsmanship and an established client base. She wasn't offering to fix it. She was showing him the problem from a different angle, the way someone hands you a map after you've been navigating by memory. At some point, he realized they'd been there 2 hours. The diner was down to its last 4 tables. Tell me something, he said. All of this, the lawsuit, the partners, the 7 a.m. board call. Do you like it? She considered the question seriously. I like solving problems. I'm good at it, but the problems I spend most of my time on now aren't interesting. They're just large. She looked out the rain-streaked window. My grandfather built the firm. My father built it further. I inherited the structure and the expectations and the weight of both of their legacies. And some days, the only thing keeping me from walking away is the fact that 600 people's retirement accounts are partially tied to how well I do my job. That's a heavy thing to be responsible for. So is a 3-man crew and a loan your dad took out. She looked at him. We're both carrying something we didn't fully choose. The diner quieted around them. Outside, a truck rumbled past on Weathersfield, spraying a tail of water from a puddle. Somewhere in the kitchen, a radio played something old and low. Willa's going to want to know how the date went, Cord said eventually. Catherine raised an eyebrow. She knows about it? She's 6. She wanted to know where I was going. I said a dinner thing. She told me to be myself and not talk too much about boats. He paused. I've already talked too much about boats. I didn't mind the boats. Catherine looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite name. Not soft exactly, but open. Something that had been fastened earlier was no longer fastened. I haven't had a conversation like this in a long time. He walked her to her car. The rain had stopped while they were inside. The street was wet and black and still, and the air smelled like early spring, like cold mud and something about to happen. The hose tape will hold for tonight, he said, but get it to a shop tomorrow. You'll want it replaced properly. I will. She looked at him. Thank you. Again. For the second time tonight. It was a good second time, he said. She smiled then. A real one, not the controlled professional acknowledgement he'd seen at the restaurant. It changed her face, made her look like the person she probably was when nobody needed anything from her. She drove away carefully. He stood in the parking lot for a minute before getting in his truck. 9 days later, Cord was in the boatyard at 7 in the morning, drinking bad coffee from a thermos and staring at the bank notice on his workbench. His foreman, a 20-year man named Dale, had seen it and hadn't said anything, which was its own kind of statement. The Chris craft was gone to its owner. The dock was quiet. Willa had left for school an hour ago with her lunch bag and her library book, kissing him on the cheek and telling him not to be sad. He was trying not to be sad. He heard the car before he saw it. A low, smooth idle, different from the delivery trucks that came down the access road. He stepped out of the shop into the cool morning. The dark coupe pulled in slowly and stopped. Catherine got out. She was dressed differently than she'd been either time before. Dark slacks, a simple jacket, hair back. Less armor than Aldwyn House, less weariness than the diner. She looked like someone who had made a decision and arrived at it calmly. She had a folder under her arm. Cord walked toward her. Behind him, Dale appeared in the doorway of the shop, and then, reading something in the air, quietly went back inside. Catherine Cord. She looked around the yard, the dry dock, the boats in various stages of work, the old hand-painted sign above the shop door that said Rousey Marine in letters his grandfather had put there in 1959. She looked at it for a moment. This is a good place. It is. She came to the workbench, laid the folder down next to the bank notice. I made some calls this week. There's a maritime heritage trust out of New Haven that provides bridge financing to qualifying coastal operations. They've done it 4 times in the last decade. All boatyards, 2 of them older than yours. She opened the folder. The application requires documentation of the business history, evidence of community economic contribution, and a demonstrated craft record. You have all of that. She turned a page. I also know the director. I can make an introduction, but you'll do the presenting. You're better at it than you think. Cord looked at the documents, then at her. This isn't charity, she said before he could say it. I've reviewed the financials you mentioned. At current billings with the client base you described, Halsey Marine is a viable operation with a cash flow timing problem. That's a solvable problem. I solve problems. This one happens to belong to someone She stopped. He waited. Someone I'd like to see succeed, she finished, and her voice was even but her eyes weren't. Willa appeared from behind the shop. She had come back from the end of the driveway where she'd been catching the bus and apparently missed it, because she was walking back with her backpack and her library book and her expression of calm, philosophical acceptance that she got from him. She stopped when she saw Catherine, looked up at her father, then back at Catherine. Are you the dinner thing? Willa asked. Cord started to say something. I am, Catherine said. She crouched down to Willa's level without hesitating, without the awkward performance that adults sometimes made of talking to children. Your dad fixed my car, in the rain. Willa considered this. He fixes a lot of things. I know. Catherine looked up at Cord briefly. I'm starting to understand that. Willa tilted her head. Do you want to see the Chris Craft pictures? We have a whole binder. I would like that very much, Catherine said. Cord called the school to report the missed bus. Then he went inside and put on more coffee, the decent kind he saved for good mornings, and listened to his daughter show a CFO the photographic record of an 11-month restoration, explaining each stage with the focused authority of someone who had grown up in a boatyard and absorbed its language without knowing she was doing it. He stood in the doorway of his shop, looking at the 2 of them at his workbench, the folder of documents beside the bank notice, beside Willa's library book, the morning light coming in flat and clean off the river. He thought about something his father used to say. The hardest repairs are the ones you can't see coming, the ones that catch you with the engine open and your hands already full. Those are also the ones, his father had said, that teach you the most about what you're actually working with. Some things couldn't be scheduled or forecast or pre-negotiated. Some things arrived on a rain-dark road and turned out to be exactly what you needed, if you had the sense to stop. Cord had stopped. The rest, he thought, they'd figure out together, piece by piece, the way anything worth keeping was always built.